Says we are live. And it's just telling me it's setting it up. Do, 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 do. Come on.
I'm going to get rid of my signature. No.
All right. I think we are live. Looks like we're good.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming this evening. We really appreciate it. Hope you'll come back often. Tell your friends about us and give us any help you can to try to increase our audience. I want to talk about the train show a few minutes here. We've got the training for it with all the vendors tomorrow night. And we're trying to do everything we can to make this a success. And I hope that everybody's here tonight can join us on the 19th of September, 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. We think that it's really going to be unusual. It's going to be a unique opportunity to meet these people and talk to them. And most of these people, I'll say right now, I don't think you've met before personally. And I think it's a real opportunity to meet some really fantastic manufacturers that go out of their way to try to produce products that some of them will just blow your mind, in my opinion. And I hope that you'll do them the courtesy and the honor, really, of attending the show and hearing what they have to say. So we really are looking forward to this, and we're going to be live streaming the train show on YouTube, the same as we do these shows. Dylan told me earlier that we have gotten something like 150 additional views on YouTube for the show last time, simply because we're live streaming them on YouTube now. So obviously that's a way that in the past we haven't been able to get that kind of audience. And now that we're live streaming the shows, not just on Zoom, but also through YouTube, the audience is increasing drastically. So we're really happy about that. This train show, like I say, is September the 19th. The next one is November the 21st. And the next one is January the 16th. And then we'll give you more dates after that. So please put them on your calendar. And if at all possible, attend and talk to the manufacturers and give them your comments and ideas. Anybody that's new tonight, if you haven't done so, please give Dylan your email address, your name, and the scale you model. And we will automatically send you an email for each of our future shows. The next My Bill show that Chris is going to be moderating is October the 14th. We hope that you'll attend it. We hope that you'll bring one of your models to talk to us about and show. And we really think that this is going to develop into a really outstanding segment of our presentations. Dylan can give you anybody that wants it. And Dylan, you might be able to post it on the chat. Dylan can give you the link for the YouTube live streaming if you want it. The only disadvantage to watching us over the live streaming is you'll have to give your comments to Dylan, and then he'll have to repeat them versus how we do it now, where you can just talk to us live through Zoom. So that's all I've really got for announcements tonight. And I'd like to turn now to our featured modelers. To me, this is going to be an outstanding show. This museum in New Hampshire, that Jack, and Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I may get close to your name tonight. It's Jack Doodle.
Nowhere close. Dziadul.
Dziadul. Well,
Jack Dziadul.
I'll keep working on it, Jack.
All right.
Anyway, Jack told me about this museum and gave me the name of the people running the museum model railroad operation. And that's how I found Rich. And I tell you, it was really an eye-opener for me. to find out that this organization in New Hampshire has developed a model railroad that is completely computerized. It's able to be run by one person. They operate 6 trains on a schedule that is the identical schedule to the Boston and Maine's operation in that area any day in 1909. The scenery is the identical scenery, the structures, everything. In my opinion, this is the closest model railroad operation that I have found in the United States that I would put on a par with the Penman Museum in Great Britain. This is one outstanding model railroad. And to see it, as Jack was kind enough to give me the opportunity through a video that he had taken of it, and then for Rich to be able to show me photos and take other videos and so forth, that's what this tonight is going to be all about. And these 2 people are going to be our featured modeler, and they're going to talk to you about this model railroad and try to explain the operation to you and show it to you. So guys, thank you so much for coming this evening. I really do appreciate it. And I really think that you're going to enjoy hearing what they have to say. So I'll turn it over, Jack, to you guys.
Hey, Rich, this is really your show tonight. This is your club layout and in your museum grounds. So I basically made the introduction to Jim, as he noted. I've been up to the museum probably 4 times now. I live in North Carolina, so I head up that way each summer. Not this year, of course. And I've had a chance to model their freight house. But you'll see the model in their layout, and you'll get to see, I think, Rich will most likely give you the whole tour of what they've done with their renovated freight house from the B&M. So, Rich, you've prepared a PowerPoint, so
Yes.
go to it, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jack. Let's see. Everyone can see me?
You're a little blurry.
A little blurry? Yeah, I was wondering. Most of the things going to be a PowerPoint. So, okay. Just a little bit of background. I've been a model railroader for a long time, about 53 years. So I started pretty young, and I didn't really let up on it. Even when I went to my teen years and college and all that, I stayed at it. So I've been at this for quite a while. About 8 years ago, I saw an article, or I saw a posting that they were going to build a model railroad in Union, New Hampshire. And I knew Bill Gaver from quite a while back, and he had a wonderful layout in not far from there. So I offered to build a model for the layout. Well, that was 8 years ago, and since that time, I've probably worked on this layout about 20 to 30 hours a week for the past 8 years, building models, doing a lot of the scenery work. That's what I really like to do, is build models and scenery. But as you know, our hobby is pretty diversified. So I've gotten involved with doing some of the electrical work, some of the other things that are in there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a PowerPoint thing that I have, give you kind of a little bit background about the layout, and then show you some pictures and then videos and how we actually computerize this, kind of our little story about that. So I guess if I hit the share screen.
That should work.
Yep, you're just going to have to select the
one I want right here.
Yep, you just got to select the one you want. And you should be good to go.
Okay, and I'll just start the slideshow from the beginning. There we go. You can see that?
Yep. Now, just real quick, I got some background noise. If you guys could just mute your mics real quick, just so that way we don't pick up on it, I would appreciate it. Just keeps us focused.
Yeah, my daughter had just come back in with the dog, so that might have been what you heard too. So. Okay.
Not a problem. Just figured I'd put it out there.
Yep. Okay, thanks. All right, so this is a picture of the freight house that we have our model railroad located in. There's a little bit of the background on that. They had restored the museum, the passenger station that was on this side. The gentleman who owned this building thought it would be much better if the building was sold to the town of Wakefield to be part of the museum that they had in the passenger station, which was already restored at that time. So they went ahead and restored the freight house, and this freight house was built in 1875. And inside of it, they got the approval to do this by using it as a conference center, educational exhibits, and they had the idea of building a historical replica of an HO scale model railroad that depicted the 5 villages of Wakefield, thinking it could be used for visitors, attractions to the town, education purposes, and so on. So that's a quick background on why we're there and what we're doing through. So the town of Wakefield is very, very supportive of our efforts. We've had a tough season this year. We haven't actually opened because of the virus, but generally we'll often get 20, 30 visitors a day on the weekend. If we have a special event like Tour de Chooch, we'll have well over 100 in a day. We don't charge admission, it's just donations, whatever people want to do. We don't push that at all. People come regularly with their children, people of all ages. So it's interesting to people that are model railroaders, as well as historical oriented people. A lot of times we'll get people tell stories about how they went to school here, or they remembered things, and they fill in the details for us, which also helps on our efforts. So we model, as Jim had said a little while ago, we modeled the Boston and Maine Railroad in the 5 villages of Wakefield in 1909. Specifically, we modeled the 3rd week of September. The reason for that is there was a major fire at one of the stations, and things kind of changed from there. And there was another fire in 1911 where all the roundhouse and turntable and things burnt. So things drastically changed after that. By picking September 1909, we get a couple things for us. The railroad was at its maximum capacity at that time, and it also allowed us to encapsulate beautiful foliage that you'll see around here in our scenery. So the area that we encompass is what you see on that map. Just north of Rochester, where I live, picks up that whole area and the 5 villages right there, right along towards the lake. We actually people researched at the B&M Historical Society and determined what all the actual track looked like. And when we developed the track plan, we followed these diagrams as closely as we could. The turnouts on the layout are all positioned and oriented very similar. The distances between the station was obviously changed so that we could fit in the building. So there's an example of one of the maps that was used. A lot of information on these maps. The little notes that you're seeing are all things like where the drain pipes are, stone walls, mail cranes, and things like that. So this is the track plan that was developed, a simplistic version of it. And these are the 5 villages that we're modeling. Union, Sanbornville, Wakefield, Burleyville, Matthews. Burleyville and Matthews were changed, but names that were changed by the railroad because things got awful confusing and there were accidents. Wakefield, East Wakefield, North Wakefield will often sound the same when you're communicating by telegraph. Packages were going in the wrong places. Cars may have ended up in the wrong places, and more important, they did not want to have accidents. This is what the overall layout looks like. Is a general view I took last week. That's one side of the layout. You can see that we have a painted upper portion that was done by a local artist, those clouds that you see. And then all the backdrops were actually photographs that I took and figured out where they should go, edited them all, and then had them printed out and glued them on very carefully in the right positions. There's another view of that layout. There's a little island that you see towards this side. So it's generally, we consider a point-to-point. And that shows some of it in a couple of the reference drawings that we use on the bottom. You'll notice a little bit that there's a monitor in there. We actually have a camera car that we often run so people have a live experience of seeing what it's like being on the train. Quite often our visitors have actually confused our video with a purchase video, thinking it was an actual real train they were looking. A little confusing, like where do I buy a ticket? Well, you're here already. So here's a little tour using some photographs, and I'm not going to dwell too long on these, but this will give you an idea how the photo backdrop and paying attention to the details. And as Jim was saying, most of our buildings are all scratch built, and we follow historical photos when we make these buildings. Try and get the colors correct and anything we can find in the history books and reference photos, glass negatives, and all that you can find. So here's the view looking into the Sanbornville Freight House. I actually took the picture from our staging area in the workshop, poking through the hole that we have in the wall. Here's the Sanbornville Freight House itself, a model I made a while back. That's back towards the rear of the layout. This is our newest station that was built in the last year. That's the large Sanbornville station. In the front is the Pioneer Building, which was the first building in 1909 that had electricity, and they generated it themselves. There was a printing press in there. They ran a weekly newspaper. So the passenger station was going through some renovations as well. That had a large dining room in it because at the time that was built, dining cars didn't exist. So they were able to serve 140 to 160 people in about a half an hour. Train would come in, unload, everyone would get fed, and they would leave. So that end that you see closest to us is where the restaurant was. The upper part of that station is the Boston and Maine headquarters, division headquarters at that point. And the president of the railroad, John Sanborn, is what this town was named after. Who was named after was the president of the railroad in a division. His office was upstairs. We actually have a model of him and his desk in there, believe it or not. So here's a little view of where the office area is. You can see more like in this general area right here. It's a fairly large building. That was all scratch built by a gentleman in Durham, New Hampshire, Jay. He does some really neat projects that he works on. This is another one of his projects, Jay Elin. That's the engine facilities on there. The turntable I had made one of the early projects on the layout. It's scratch built, it's manual. And the roundhouse in the back is 8 stalls. This whole area is what burnt in 1911. You can see a snowplow and a pile driver. That pile driver was actually built in the New Hampshire area as a model of it. The original pile driver was built around here. Here's the Wakefield station. This is one of the buildings that Bill Gaver made. That's also scratch built. You notice the fancy lattice work on this end. Anybody might be able to recognize what that is. That's actually the facilities for the building. Didn't necessarily want to have open outhouses, so a lot of times they would put up privacy screens like that. It's a beautiful model. It was in Wakefield. Today they call that Wakefield Corner. This is another view of it. The heating, the coal bins over here are made right from Boston and Maine plans. Bill did a fantastic job on this model. You'll notice a lot of the stations have stone walls near them. The railroad put that up as demarcations. We found that on a lot of their drawings. Here's the East Wakefield station. Bill also made this model. East Wakefield area was very, very busy. It covered a good part of Maine. Maine didn't have Newfields, and those areas did not have a train service. So they actually had stagecoaches that would run from there to here. And the history books we see claim they ship 40 boxcars of cut lumber, finished lumber every week. Kind of hard to believe that they would load all those cars by hand. That's what they did. So this is an overall view of East Wakefield. I have a separate presentation that I often do on here. It's an interesting area that you're looking at. Jim often talks about scales and things like that. To get this forced perspective, I'll show you a little bit what we're talking about here. This is a photo backdrop way in the back. So there's a mountain that's actually from a real photograph. And all those trees and the grass over here are a farm. I went up on a farmer up on top of Wakefield gave us permission. I went and took a bunch of photographs, about 90 photos, and stitched them all together. So that gives you that distance. This schoolhouse is actually an N scale model. There's a barn way up here that's a Z scale model. This Victorian house is actually a 3/4 of HO scale. This was the post office and the station agent's house. Bill made that model. That building is still there today in East Wakefield. And then again, another view of the station. So it's kind of interesting. If you look at that distance we're talking about here, that's actually all less than 2 feet when you're looking from the front to the back. So there's a lot packed in there, and it certainly looks like a lot more than 2 feet. There's another view of that station and the background buildings. Go a little further on the line here is this is the Matthews station. That's the first station, the building that I offered to Bill 8 years ago. It has a full interior, and I have it as one of my models that's earned merit for the work I'm doing in the NMRA Achievement Program. So it's already been judged and things like that. It has a full interior, all the rafters are in there because it's a relatively small building. But it's got enough of the details and things like that it made it. There's another view of it with a passenger train stopped in front. This was a flag stop station. So here's an outhouse as well, very similar to the other station. They did put in lattice work, but it was so poorly built in the real prototype that I didn't want to even deal with that. I believe it came up around 1911. At least that's the story I'm saying. Here's on the other side of the layout. This is approaching Union. They call this Union Meadows. And there's a waterway, and it's still there today. There's a gas station near there today, but people always know where Union Meadows is. This is more into Union itself. Most of the buildings you're seeing there are actually still there today. Interestingly, the freight house that Jack was just talking about is just behind where that meat delivery wagon is. That Union Station is not the one that you see in the other photographs or you see at Heritage Park today. This is the one that was there in 1909. It was actually torn down and a new one was built in 1911, 1912. That's the one that's houses the museum today. That's the Union Hotel. When the railroad first came here in 1854, that was the end of the line here. So if you went any further, you'd stay at the Union Hotel and would take a stagecoach from there. And that was the case until 1871. This is called the Flatiron House, or it was the post office. It's a trapezoidal building that's still there today. It's a private residence now. You'll notice the sign over here. Those are all handmade. Scratch built them out of brass and painted them and made decals and stuff like that. That's what the B&M used for railroad crossings in 1909. Wagons would actually go underneath this thing. They're almost 15 feet tall. This is a closer view of the Union Station. Jay built this model. It's also scratch built. I did the detailing around it, and when I planted it on the layout, as Jay calls it. This is another building that a couple people made some of this work. Bill Gaver made the coal shed. This is in Sanbornville. Another man, George Allen, made the woodshed part because they still had wood-fired locomotives in 1909. And then these outbuildings, the superintendent's office and a few other buildings over there. But this is a beautiful model that Bill thoroughly researched and made a model of. It's you actually can deliver coal inside there. Here's another view of it. If you look around the layout, visitors love these kind of things because we're trying to take people back to 1909. And the way we end up doing that is a lot of the little scenes of what life was like ice being delivered, people doing laundry by hand, kids going to one-room schoolhouses. So here you see this little scene where there's a couple that took their rowboat, they're on Level Lake. They came in having a picnic lunch down on the shore of the Level Lake. And even today, Level Lake is used by a lot of visitors that come to New Hampshire. But there's another view of that. The coal hopper cars would be pushed up in here. They drop down by gravity, and there was a cart system inside here that moved the coal was shoveled by hand to the carts. The carts would go to an elevator, and then they would go to a tipple area, and the locomotives would come down over here, loaded from there. So what I'm going to do now is I've shown you what a lot of the buildings, not all of them, obviously, there's a lot more on the layout all the time, but give you a quick tour kind of around the layout. But as we all know, as model railroaders, making models and having museum dioramas or all that is interesting. But what's really interesting is when we see the trains run. So let's see how this works here. So I'm taking this photograph and there's no one else in the building at the time. It's running by itself. So you'll get some idea what Jim was just talking about. The program we use is kind of like a dispatcher. It figures out the best route. It knows where the trains need to go, and then they do their things at each block they're in. This is the express train. It stops at Sanbornville. All the sounds are controlled by the computer.
All the stops are also controlled, aren't they?
Pardon?
All the stops are automatically controlled too.
Yep, they are. It depends on, like you said, the schedule they're following. The express train, for example, only stops in the Sanbornville station and way up in Conway, which is off our layout. So, but yeah, all of that and the sounds and the grade crossings and when the bells ring and all of that, it determines on where it is in the block. So let me, I don't know if I started this over again. Let me jump ahead a little bit here. Is that loud enough?
We can hear it.
So did you optimize, Rich, you may want to stop sharing and reshare and optimize your share for video.
Yep. Oh, share video?
No, if you stop sharing for a second, Dylan, you may want to crop this out, but if you stop sharing for a moment and then reshare.
Okay.
And when you reshare, you'll notice at the bottom, there's a thing that says optimize for video. If you click on that, it'll make the video. So actually unshare.
All right, wait a minute.
At the very top, where it's that little red box on the top, go up there and unshare.
Top share, okay.
And now go to share again, but before you click to share, at the bottom of the share window, when you open the window to share, look at the bottom and see there's a little button that says optimize for video.
Okay.
Click on that and then share again. Then the video will be much smoother.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'm just learning this. I'm fairly new at this. Okay, let's see if it's better.
Oh, for some reason it's all.
I don't have a way of editing the videos, so these are all raw film. It's going on its own thing. So kind of like what a visitor would see in TV. I use the practice to ring the bell when the device faces that way. This one here is an interesting video. It goes back a little while. You'll hear Chris Oliver talking in it. It was the very first time that the layout was designed to run shorter trains, just like the real prototype did. They did have longer trains, but for the most part, when we designed the layout, we planned on it being for shorter trains, maybe 2 to 6 cars or so. Chris being looking for things to push the programming and the realism of the layout as far as he could, decided he would see how long of a train he could actually make run. So this was the first time we were running this train. So people were kind of amazed. I grabbed my camera and just started filming it. So it was taken the first time around on this thing. So.
Probably just going to get my hand on the emergency stop button. We'll work it out. Oh, hang on a second. I could solve this problem.
It's Chris Oliver you're hearing.
Uh-oh. That turnout flip?
It's okay.
This is an amazing thing. Yes, I don't want to power it. Get over the causeway. Can you see the restriction?
That's an Excelsior mill in the back. Why don't you see that? Green colored.
What's this? Yeah, well, we got nowhere to put it. I thought they had a train in the station.
Okay, so we'll stop the videos for a little bit. I got some more after this. So the question always comes up. Is everyone back there?
Yes,
Do I have to stop this and restart it again?
Nope, everyone's still here.
Okay. So I'll what a little bit of the background with this is we had designed the layout all along and built it to be in a museum environment. So as far as computerizing the layout, maybe we had envisioned that early on, but what we really wanted was a very reliable layout that would kind of run itself. We had intended on 1 or 2 trains being run, depending how many volunteers we had working that day. We made it so it was for a museum environment. So Chris Oliver also lives in Rochester. He has a beautiful large layout. He models Donner Pass. It's 5 levels high. He runs 15 trains at a time, 40 cars at a time, and it runs itself. So it's absolutely amazing. So I visited that and I told him what we were doing in Union with our smaller layout. And he was interested in doing that. And I kind of saw a match that maybe we could do a lot more. So what Chris came to visit, we did a lot of the things that were right because of the environment, museum environment. One of the things you'll notice, and a lot of times people will come in and they'll say like, there's no buttons on the walls, on the fascia. And that was done intentionally. That worst thing you could have happen is to have visitors come in and start touching things. So even the NCE controller you see here, the handheld, we don't have those out there when visitors come in. In actuality, we barely ever use those at all now, other than for diagnostic purposes. The layout is completely run with train controller. Even the programming and things like that, it's all done that way. So we have those out here if we're testing to see if a turnout's working locally without running the computer. The fact that we were using NCE was an advantage. The fascias are all clean, so there's no push buttons to worry about false things and stuff like that. This is our, we had this broken up already with PSXs. So detect if we had shorts and things like that. That has been rewired to make it make more sense for the train controller. But the positions of these things were moved around a little bit, so they were rewired there. We have put in some extra boosters to isolate some sections that improve the reliability tremendously. But the things that we're doing on the layout were already aimed a little bit towards that. You'll notice in this picture over here, I just noticed that this one of those stagecoaches I was talking about. It goes to East Wakefield. Underneath the layout, we made the layout pretty accessible. Bill had the idea to use these engineered beams. So we have very few legs under the layout, makes it very useful for any handicapped visitors. And there's no obstructions per se we can get under there. We use cobalt switch machines. You see a tortoise here. That tortoise is actually to run a semaphore, one of our signals that we have on there. We were running the turnout, the frogs from the cobalts, and we've changed to frog juicers. So you're seeing a frog juicer on that side there. So that's stuff we had before, the wiring that was under there. The software we chose is they're made by Railroad and Company in Germany, the Freewall software, the train controller, and the version we have is Gold. Very, very robust program. Chris, when he was a teenager, tried to develop his own software to do that. And so he's already seen that this was workable for his layout. And why develop things yourself when they have such a robust program? So we've been very, very happy with the software. This is what it looks like. the computer that actually runs it. And the switchboard is displayed. I noticed last Saturday, you had Darren. He had a switchboard and talked a lot about how that was built and all of that. It's fairly straightforward that, you know, you build it piece by piece to match your layout. The software that we get from for the free wall thing actually plugs in. It's like a dongle that gives you the software part, and then you get updates. In the front is my iPad that I use to also control the trains, and I have a little video I'll show you about that in a minute. This is the switchboard display, a little bit closer view. A lot of capabilities in this software. It's absolutely amazing. Comes in 3 versions: bronze, silver, and gold. We went for the top one, the gold one, which is often what exhibitions and museums use. It allows you a whole bunch of things you can do, and I don't need to necessarily go through all of those at this point over here, but you can run in edit mode, or you can have it, the toolbars and the drop menus are there. So it's very, very user-friendly. It's kind of a language that you typically would use, very similar to what you'd see in Windows or other typical computer applications. This is the switchboard display, they call it, is the name that they use. This gives us overall program control. The status of the trains are down in this area. You can actually see the status, and I'll show you a video of that in a minute. You have a train and locomotive list in here. So you can pick which trains when you want to start a schedule, or if you want to remove them from a schedule, if something is working, or if someone wants to run it manually, they can do that. At the same time, the computer is running the trains. You just follow the steps the computer is telling you. It shows you the signal status. You'll see a lot of little lights and things here. You can change the turnouts from here. The turnouts do change automatically, but if for some reason you need to change it for yourself, you can do that as well. We also use this for saving the program, starting it up and shutting it down. We do have a startup procedure because Jim at one point talked about it's one button and this goes. Well, it's not quite that, but it's not so bad. You kind of learn it pretty quick. So there's a few buttons you push in the right sequence, and you make sure the computer's on, the Wi-Fi is on, the NCE is on, and so-and-so, and you go through that. You also make sure that the trains are in the right positions in case somebody came in and moved the trains on us, because the computer is assuming the trains are in a given location when you start. If for some reason they got moved around without the program running, it might get lost. So that happens occasionally, but we can reset it pretty quick. So this shows you the overall switchboard. This is the toolbar I was just talking about. This is a diagram of our layout, and it connects at point A here with this. This is our staging area. Here's Union, Sanbornville. Then we go to Wakefield, East Wakefield, Matthews, and we sort of have a staging loop we call Intervale, which is just north of North Conway. The railroad referred a lot of times to Intervale. It was a yard of sorts up there. These are control buttons, kind of like icons that you can do. We have an e-stop set up in case something does go wrong. You hit an e-stop button and it does a control shutdown in a hurry, but so that you can end up recovering more easily. This is a list of the trains. They don't all end up running at once, but it shows us what's available, and you can put them in the schedule and things like that. This is the status of the trains running. So you get an idea if they got a red light, green light, and such. You can look at the status of a block here. And this is basically a view of one of the throttles for a particular locomotive. In this case, Boston and Maine 2606. Here's a little closer view of that. And this shows you some of the things. I'll talk about that. It's the same thing that you'll see in a minute on another thing that we do. There's a close-up of that. The pink is showing an occupied block. It has a red light, for example. This one here is in East Wakefield near the freight house, and it also has a red light. We can use a handheld throttle using an iPhone, an iPad. You can use Androids, but for some reason it seems the program works better, is more receptive to the Apple products for the handheld portion. There are people that use Windows-based ones and it works okay. The train controller software features for your handheld are a little bit limited, but it's pretty amazing what it actually can do. You can the locomotives are identified. You have a speedometer. Interestingly, we have an odometer as well. We know how many miles the locomotives are on, so eventually we could use that for maintenance and things like that. It controls the direction. It has a brake. It has a throttle. It has control functions that you see over here. It has the signal status, that green light you're seeing here. You also can monitor your water level in the locomotive, and you can model your fuel or coal level in the locomotive. And then I talked about the function buttons already. So that shows what you can do with your handheld. In addition, you can use the handheld as a switchboard. This is very handy when you have visitors. You can be explaining the layout to people if you're by yourself, and often we are. You're explaining the layout, some features and models and things like that to families and things like that. And you can keep an eye on your handheld. And by doing that, it allows you certain things like you can monitor where the trains are. So you kind of be like a crystal ball. You get an idea what they're going to do in general, but you can anticipate if a train's arriving, which train is arriving. So you can kind of glance down at your iPhone as you're talking to them. And more important, you can also identify if something's not quite right. You might be able to figure it out right here. If something is going wrong, you can stop a schedule. You can restart the schedule, and you can do an emergency stop. And one of the other things we use quite a bit is locking the blocks. I find that quite useful when you're in a museum environment, because if you have a dead time, there's no need of letting the trains run for an hour with nobody there. So we just lock the blocks, and what it does is it allows the trains to come to a controlled, favorable stop. And then they just wait, and then you unlock the blocks and everything comes back to life. Here's a case right here. I'm going to show you what it looks like. We're back on a video. Here's a train going by, and I'm going to show you what you can do with your handheld and give you some idea what it looks like. Here I'm holding the handheld. That's the train that just went by. It shows it's going 30 miles an hour. The odometer just clicked. I'm pushing the function button. Listen. Neutral. Go. You see it has a red signal. It's going to be stopping at the Breton station. It's coming to a stop. It does this thing. Now it has a yellow light that allows it to proceed through the staging area. It's a set speed of 15 miles per hour. And here it starts running. I'm pushing the button. I'm going to change it to a switchboard. You can turn it and just like the regular iPhone function. It ranges the view. Now you can monitor the train. You can actually see it arriving in the staging area. In the upper part of that screen. Move that around a little bit. And we're going back to the throttle. Now this is an interesting little view over here. We never usually show people this part. This is the staging area, but I want to show it to you for one reason especially. The program, you can do a lot of things with this program if you're a creative mind and you anticipate you want to do certain things. So in this case over here, this is the staging. It's a little messy. We haven't been working since March, but it shows the trains running into staging, and I want you to notice something when I show this. I'll point it out to you, but I think you're going to pick it up yourselves. Here's the train running in. We'll stop. Hear this noise coming as the train comes. Notice the sound cut off. You try to not have a lot of sound in the staging area because you go crazy with 3-4 trains in there at once. You'll notice that another train is leaving, that's the express. And it's not making any sound either until it gets closer to leaving the staging area. There you go. It's kind of a behind the scenes look. I'm going to jump around on this one a little bit. This is what the switchboard looks like when it's running. So like again, I didn't edit this video. So if you look at it, some of it's a little boring. So I'll jump ahead a little bit, but I'll start it running. It doesn't look like he's doing anything, but it actually is. This is the proof it's running. You'll see a train appeared right in here. So it's kind of showing what's occupied, where things are coming in and all that. So you can actually see what's going on with the train. You see that train is moving ahead. So we'll get a little closer here. So I'll jump ahead. We don't want to get through all of this. The focus will be better in a second. See how it has a red light and there's a yellow indicator? It's going into the East Wakefield yard. Sorry for the jiggle. You'll also see there's a train back here going behind the coal shed. So you can kind of watch the trains moving on the switchboard. Give you an idea where they're going, what they're going to be doing next, and things like that. So it's not always the same. It's kind of as like a dispatcher. If the route is blocked, it'll find an alternate route, just like a dispatcher would do. If the train is stalled, for example, it'll try to run around it as much as it can. So it doesn't always do a predetermined route. It'll determine what's the best way to go. Okay, so these are some of the parts and how we converted it to use the train controller software. The most important change that we made was to add current detectors to the blocks. These are those little things you're seeing over here. These are called CT coils. They're not very expensive. You get 8 of them for around $13, $14. And they get connected to the track on, I've got a diagram that shows that. Here they are installed off of the bus. So any current change, it picks that up and lets it go to the watchman. And then that watchman communicates with the local buffer and through a gateway, through a USB port on the computer, and train controller knows that. Here's a watchman installed under the layout, and these are those CT coils. Here's that gateway where this stuff is coming back into place, and there's another view of a watchman. We use a lot of that CAT cable. Chris uses that. It's very handy. You get a lot of twisted pairs and it works perfect for that.
Dylan,
Go ahead, Jim.
Dylan, can you get the other sound off of this?
It's background noise, so there's not much I can do about it, Jim.
But why, can you just mute everybody else until?
Everyone else is muted. I'm thinking it might be in Rich's background.
Okay. Thank you.
Which it is what it is.
I understand. Thank you.
There may be it's maybe a TV in the other room.
Okay.
I can lower the microphone a little bit, maybe, but you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I explained this particular slide. We use a lot of these push-on connectors. Chris suggested these things way back when I visited them. And if you have to make any changes, they're like fantastic. I start using them for everything now, even like lighting and things like that. You just push them in place with a spade connector. And
Rich, what do you call those?
They're
Suitcase connectors.
oh, come on. Wait a minute.
Yeah, those actually do look like suitcase connectors. I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
Suitcase. No, they're not suitcase. They're tap connectors. So you use a spade connector. It clamps onto your wire, so you don't have to do any, just like a suitcase would. The red ones are suitcase connectors, okay? These ones right here, that's a suitcase connector, but right near it is a yellow tap, and then the red spade that pushes into it. So it's kind of like a little connector, but you just crimp them on, and very, very handy. They come in all different wire sizes. They now make them in black for like 26 gauge wire and smaller. Red is a real popular one that gives you like your 22 gauge to 24. Blue is in the mid range, like 18. And then yellow picks up the heavier wire. But those are really, really handy. They're not too expensive when you end up, buying them in big enough sizes. Here's a little closer view of them after explaining all that. So those are the CT coils, there's a cobalt. Here's what one of those connectors would look like over here. Really, really handy to have.
That certainly does look handy. And Tim Gilman, he was on with us a while back. Those connectors look like they would be quite helpful in a tight space. Yeah.
I don't know how the situation is with other stuff, but you can get like 100 of those things for $5, depending on the size. So it's pretty good.
It might actually be quite helpful for wiring some lighting.
Oh yeah, they are. You know how you always wonder how you're going to make the connection under your layout? They're super for that. I've got whole kits of them at the museum and at home now. So.
Where do you get those from? Can you just get those from like Micromark or something, or you pick them up at Home Depot?
I don't know if Micromarks has them yet, but some automotive stores have them. But you really don't want to go there. You really want to like an Amazon or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say Amazon has them.
Parts Express, places like that. I think All Electronics might even have some too. There's a lot of places for them. So, but you buy a regular spade, crimp-on spade connector, the 1/4-inch ones, and it depends on what size you're getting, but the 1/4-inch ones, and they fit right in there. You see, I'm using a red one with a smaller wire up here, going into a larger bus wire, and then down here I got a larger bus wire going into another larger bus wire. They're really handy, and we're stopping to use these suitcase connectors because to take those apart is a real pain.
Oh, believe me, I don't get me wrong. Suitcase connectors have their place, but there are times that they are very much a pain in the butt.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many times me and Tim would fight with those on his layout, and just one of them just trying to get the wire to sit in it just right, so that the light that you're connecting to actually lights up.
Yeah, well,
the bus wire ain't the issue; it's the smaller wires that they deal with.
Yeah, well, I didn't wire this layout originally. But when we went to train controller and added all those current detectors, I'm the one that, working with Chris, he was doing the software part and giving me guidance on what to do over here. And then I went ahead and meticulously added the blocks, current detectors. So I corrected any of the wiring deficiencies we found along the way and things like that. So I've been doing a lot of wiring for the past 2.5 years, more than I had expected, but that's okay. You always learn something. So it works. That's good. It's fulfilling. Here's a typical diagram of what we're doing with those current detectors, okay? Just to understand it. You can find a really clean one on RR Circuits, is the people we buy these from. I actually bought them from Tony's, but Circuits is the one, the place that sells them as well. They're, interestingly, with the NMRA discounts and stuff, they're both identical price. We did a lot of stuff from Tony's, as more people are familiar with. They do a really good job with DCC stuff in Vermont. So this diagram here shows the track. And normally what you'd have is you'd have your DCC bus, and these would go directly to your track. So what you got to do is you want to put in these CT coils, and I tried to make a simpler diagram of this going to the Watchman. So you add these CT coils, which is just, it literally looks like an encapsulated choke. The wire passes through it, but what you want to make sure you do is if you've got multiple taps, you want to make sure that it's completely isolated from the bus. So you can see the electricity would go through here, and you got to go through the coil. So anything that happens on this track at that point is detected by that CT coil. And then that transfers right over here to the Watchman, and then the Watchman goes on the SSB network, and that goes right to the computer area, the local. My name's right here, the local buffer, and that gives you the interface to the USB, and then the train controller reacts to that, and other programs will do the same kind of thing. So you got a bunch of like parallel things. So here's this network is only handling all of these signals for when things come in. One of the issues we have once in a while when we have a lot of visitors, the one thing you've got to watch out for, you guys have all used and seen touch lamps. A visitor can have enough resistance in their hands that if they touch your track while the trains are running, sometimes they'll fool the program and the resistance in their hand will click off like a block is occupied. So you can just imagine if a train is running down the track and somebody touches the block in front of the locomotive, the computer now believes the locomotive arrived in that block and may flip the turnout under the train. So we're always after people like, don't touch the track. They shouldn't be doing that anyways, but when we have a lot of people, sometimes I believe that's been an issue occasionally. But if people keep their hands in their pockets, there's no problem. This is another view of where our NCE system is. One of the things we did is we made an auxiliary booster just for all the switch machines, the Cobalts, and we have one just for the track. The main reason for that is if for some reason you'd have a short and the short occurred, you know, you'll momentarily lose power with these PSXs. If you momentarily lose power, it'll cut off the power to the turnout, and it might be at the time it's trying to change states. And sometimes that may cause us some problems. So by isolating that and putting it on its own booster, a lot of those things have gone away. You still have issues like if you have a power failure or a blip, you know, something that the lights flicker in the building, you might have, you know, miss a signal, but you know, that's what you got to live with. One of the big things you've got to do this, you know, a lot of people use optical sensors and things like that, but if you're using a resistance thing, one of the things you have to do, one of the jobs and some of the clubs are heavily involved with this as well. If you got a lot of cars, you need to put some kind of resistor on the wheels. This is a little piece I extracted from another clinic that I've done on how to apply resistors to wheels. We use 1.8 kilo ohms. That's what Chris suggested. That's what he uses in his layout. The technical part of that, I guess you're looking for a 5 milliamp load. That's the system will detect. So by using ACC or epoxy, you can see up here that there's a resistor that was added to this wheel. And then I checked it and you get that 1.8, which is supposed to be. These are surface mounted resistors. It can be cemented in. We also use conductive pens. You can get them in carbon, nickel, or silver, and it goes up in price. And then paint and seal it for appearance after it's done. So I'll just flip through these fairly quickly. Here's one of those surface mounted resistors right there. And in this case, this conductive paint was added with this paint pen to make the contact with the metal part of the wheels. We have to have at least one of the wheels on the cars that have that. Not all your cars are needed. More you have, the more reliable and predictable things are. Locomotives automatically have a resistance in them, so you don't have to do that in a locomotive. Part of the trick here is figuring out what kind of wheels you have. If you get plastic insulated axles, you can have a metal axle with one side insulated. You can have a metal axle and both sides are insulated. There are some that are pretty difficult to work. Old timers, as we all getting there, will remember that there are cars that used to be insulated using like this red epoxy things, like some old label parts. Those are pretty hard to add resistors to. So some cases we have to put new trucks. So here's where you would determine where you have to put your resistor. So in this case, we're connecting to the axle to the wheel. In this case, you go wheel to wheel. So anyways, that's, so I'm going to show some more videos at this point, more for the entertainment part of the things. So we'll let that run and I'll talk through it and then we'll answer questions. The express train arriving at the passenger station again. This is kind of what I do when I have visitors. The trains do their thing, and I explain the features of the layout, and you not only can explain the structures and scenes, you can explain what the trains are doing. So that's a local freight departing a freight station in the back.
Rich, if you turn down the sound a little on your video viewer, we can hear you better.
Okay. Whoops, no, I turned it off. Okay.
Even a little lower.
All right. Yeah. So here's a case where the passenger express train is leaving the station. It's now going towards Wakefield. The track is all level on this layout, except for right near the coal shed. We did that for reliability. If you look at the layout, you would think it's going up grades and things, but in actuality, it's all level track. We did it by contouring the scenery instead. Interestingly, we have an engineer, and he's the one who had the idea for having a layout in this building, Corey. He runs in New Hampshire North Coast locomotives and waves to us when he goes by. And he's the one who had the idea for that. And when we run the camera cars, he says what he's looking at is pretty much what he sees in his locomotive every day when he's there.
Dick, we can't hear you at all.
Right?
Rich, you need to turn it down a little bit.
Okay. Oh, it's too loud. Okay, I see it. Sorry. I gotta do that on each one. Forgot. express train going by. It doesn't stop at the Wakefield station. The local will stop at each station, so the visitor can see the difference between a local and an express. I'm going to kind of follow the train a little bit here with the camera. This is the East Wakefield Freight House. There's a dock pen. You notice the train slows down when it's got a reverse turnout. That's what a good operator would do that. Doing the grade crossing whistle. There's a little hesitation here. I'm not sure what that is, but we've had a harder time with some of the bigger locomotives. I think they're older. May have been intentional. I don't know. The hesitation, I noticed that. Not too bad, though. The grass you see in the foreground is static grass. It's more like a hayfield and things like that. So, let's see, I think I got another. Let me fix the volume before I start this one. This is entering the loop.
Rich, I forgot from the very beginning. Where's the museum located?
Union, New Hampshire.
Great, thank you.
It's right on Route 125. I got a little video coming up after this that kind of gives you a better idea what the rest of the museum looks like.
Rich, Chris asked if those were Bachmann locomotives.
Yes, they are for the most part. Yep. I think all the ones you saw tonight are all Bachmann locomotives. They were, one of the things with this kind of a layout, which is a little bit of a challenge, is because we modeled 1909. These are all tiny little locomotives. There are 440s, 260s. We do have two 80s. Early consolidated that were coming around by 1905. Those are our bigger locomotives. But anyone who's ever worked with HO trains, especially people that deal with narrow gauge and things like that, getting smaller locomotives like that to run reliably is a really challenge. One of the things that we started doing is started putting cupolized or capacitor units inside of them. That's
Rick, could you turn the sound down?
Yep. Okay, that one ended. So let me start. I got one more, I think. Let me fix the sound. The sound's off completely right now. Okay.
Excuse me, what did you do to get better performance out of the Bachmann locomotives?
Well, what we did is we try to maintain them the best we can. Lubricating them, cleaning them, and things like that. But when we put in sound decoders, the ones that didn't come with them originally, we also put in there's different brands, but they call cupolized. A cupolize is basically a capacitor unit. And if you lose power momentarily, it'll continue to run the locomotive for like 6 seconds, which is enough to get you by a dirty spot. Or it's kind of weird that if you picked up a locomotive, it will keep running for about 6 or 8 seconds by itself.
Thank you.
It's not a catch-all for everything. One day we were running, because we run the trains a lot in the summertime. If we have like a tour of the troops, we're running for 8 hours at a time, non-stop, with a lot of people in there. One of the things that I can see coming is people, instead of cleaning their track, they use cupolized. eventually your track will get so dirty that even the 6 or 8 seconds won't work anymore. We had a case where the train stopped working, and I looked at it, and we had about 8 inches of black on the rails, guys, so I had to clean that off. But for the most part, our tracks do stay clean. Chris always says the best way to keep your track clean is keep the trains running. Because the trains will tend to keep it clean if they're running. It makes sense. If you leave it idle for a long time, then it doesn't run so good. Although we haven't really run the train since March, and I started them right up to make these videos, and they work fine.
Rich, I took a look at your museum on Google Earth. I see you have a water tower across the tracks from it. Is that still functional?
Yep, that's original. It was originally in Alton. It was near Guilford, New Hampshire. And it was in Alton, and it was at a campground, and they didn't want it anymore. They were going to bulldoze it down. They contacted the museum, and the museum decided to move it and restore it.
That's fantastic.
You'll see a little bit of that in a second here. So, this is kind of chasing this train down in the East Wakefield yard. I think this is done. I don't know how many more. I think I got one more of these things. Let me. So that loop that you're seeing towards the right, we can hold up to 3 trains in that area. If we were to redesign the layout, Chris is always mentioning, if we had a double track there, life would have been a lot easier. But most of our main line is a single track, just like it was in 1909, except for the passing sidings and things like that. You'll notice there's an N scale house here, and that's a section house. Each of the locations where the railroad show they were, we had put one of those in there. Let's see what's going on here. We're waiting for the train to come back. There we go. So they're kind of queuing up in that loop, and then they'll restart once the track is clear. One of the things Chris points out quite often is a lot of people wonder why you'd want to computerize your layout. There's a lot of reasons for it, actually. One of the comments that's often made, we'll spend 400 or 500 hours sometimes on a model. Why wouldn't you spend the same amount of time on getting your operations to look just as good? That's one of the comments. The second one is, how we always you try to have operating sessions and you have a hard time getting your operators. You might need 4 people, 8 people to run the trains. With this setup, you can run the trains. Most of the trains can be run with a computer, and you can run the trains yourself to do like switching, and you just work within the schedule, and the train controller will tell you when you can go and give you the signals. You just ask it, or you basically tell it where you want to go, where you're starting from, where you want to go, and it'll fit you in the schedule. I did that with a visitor one day. It was kind of an interesting little story. This guy was a real life engineer, works for CSX out of Hagerstown, Maryland, and runs down to Cherry Run. And he came in with his family. They were vacationing in New Hampshire, and I gave him my handheld that I showed you earlier. I just told him a little bit, where the throttle and things were, not really any training. And he made the comment that the software works exactly like real life. He was able to take a train from the Sanbornville coal shed brought it around to Intervale and back on his own, interacting with the computer without any other formal training. I thought that was a real testament to how well the software is done. You know, to be able to do that, you know, of course, it's not like, you know, throttled in a real locomotive, but the operations and stuff was very, very similar for him.
And Rich, while he was, Rich,
Sorry, okay, go ahead.
while he was doing that, the computer ran the other trains just as they normally would.
That's right. He basically asked for his clearance electronically, and when the computer could fit him in the schedule, it gave him the green light, and he proceeded at what speed he wanted to, and it told him where to stop. He got a red signal when he was told to stop. So then he had to wait in that siding while the other train went by, and once he got a green signal again, then he could proceed to the next block, and he worked his way around the layout doing that himself. You know, and the software was working it so that the express train went by and the through freight went by and things like that. And the local was actually stopped to let him go by, you know, depending on the priority of the trains. So that is an interesting thing. This video over here, this is the last video that I have, and then we can answer some of the questions. This video appeared on our local television station. It's WMUR Channel 9 in Manchester, New Hampshire. A little bit of a background. We were working on a Wednesday in the layout, and this guy, Fritz Weatherby, is pretty well known in the area. He's an old timer, and he talks a lot about history. And he had planned, without our knowing it, to talk about Union. And he had shown up, and he kind of knocked on the door, and I greeted him. I recognized him when he came to the door. I said, "You're Fritz Weatherby." And he said, "Yes, I am." He's 83 years old, sharp as a whip, and he knows a lot about history. So he came in and filmed his piece outside our museum. And then he said, "Is it okay if I come in?" I said, "Of course." So I showed him and gave him a little tour. And ironically, one of our placards was exactly what he was going to talk about during his little piece. And so he told the crew that was with him, the camera crew, he says, "Have you guys ever been here before?" And he said, "No." "Well, I want you to film this." He says, "But not too much, just a little bit." He says, "We're going to put it on the program." So it's a little short video. I can show you the whole thing. It's only a few minutes. At the end of it, the last 30 seconds or so, he talks about our museum, and they really did a good job. And what's interesting, I'm not going to talk through the video, but what's interesting about this video is we were having a work session during that time, and we were just running trains, and we didn't do anything special for him or his crew. They just did whatever they wanted while we were there. I was talking to him, the trains were running, and the crew came in with a professional camera and took photographs of it. So I'll play this little video, and then we can go through, I'll go back to a live view, and then we'll answer questions and stuff like that. Okay, so want me to play this? I'll leave this one at the regular volume. There's a little bit of history at the beginning, but it's not too long. I think you might find it interesting. So, okay, what am I gonna do right?
Here at the very southern point of the town of Wakefield is this, the village of Union. I say southern point because the town is in the shape of a diamond. And the southern part of the town comes to an actual point. Union is here because of the Branch River, all the water power that it provided. The river parallels the main street of the village. By 1802, there was a carding mill here, and by 1827, there were a dozen enterprises that used the water power. Sometime before 1817, a guy named James Handy built a cotton mill here, and the 1889 Carroll County history claimed that the Handy mill may have been the very first cotton mill in the state. It wasn't. The very first cotton mill was over in New Ipswich, New Hampshire, but this could have been the second. Back then, this was a major manufacturing town. Still, the railroad did not come here to Wakefield until 1854, when the Great Falls and Conway Railroad arrived. This later became the Boston and Maine. That year, 1854, was also the year they chose the name for the town. As the only railway station in Carroll County, this place no longer was just a part of Wakefield. It had pride. They suggested the name Federal Village, and it was because much of the town had voted with the Federalists in the election, but there were a few Republicans here in town as well, and they objected, and so they agreed upon a name between the two of them. They came to, as it were, a union, and of course, that was a compromise, and union it has remained. By 1871, the line finally got through up into Wakefield itself. The depot here in Union was built in 1912. Train service closed in 1956. The wonderful old station you see here and the freight house that goes with it is part of the Heritage Park Railroad Museum, which also includes a scale modeled B&M railroad line. Isn't that a beautiful layout?
Okay, this is just my last slide because this is one of our scenes that some of the people will see, and there's a New Hampshire moose. And you see that photo backdrop in the back. It kind of shows the fall foliage season, which is just around the corner around here. But that's a marshy area modeled in the back with a moose in it there. That once in a while we'll ask the kids and the visitors, can you find the moose? And they finally eventually will find that it's around the corner, so they got to look for it, but it'll show up. So, oops, wait, I went the wrong way. Okay, there we go. So I can stop the sharing part now. And I think we're all back to normal here, right?
We are indeed.
Okay, so if you got any kind of questions or things like that, I'll do the best I can answer. Like I told you at the beginning of this, my real interest in the hobby is building models and scenery. That's what I really like, but you learn a lot of things. I learn something every day. I think that's what, Jim says that often in the talks you guys have. And I have the same situation when you're doing stuff. It's kind of like learning a new language or learning new ways of doing things and stuff like that. There's always something to learn.
Hey, Rich.
Yep.
Are the consists historically accurate?
The rolling stock that you see, we actually researched that as well. And we try to make sure the cars are 1909 or before. We got a couple ones that sometimes someone will donate and Bill will be like, it's like 1911, and we might have one or two like that on there, but for the most part, we get people visiting from the Boston and Maine Historical Society, and those guys know their stuff, believe me. One of the guys that comes up and visits quite often, he knows 1910 to now, anything you want to know, but he says he doesn't know so much before 1910. So maybe we have a little bit of a blessing. I don't know. There is one guy from the Historical Society says, "Oh, I didn't know they had a drover caboose." You saw one there that went by. But then he said they might have. We don't know, because at that time a caboose was custom made for the train crew. They did their own design. So like the late 1800s. There was almost no standard design. Some of them were converted box cars. Some were, little bobbers, whatever they find. So eventually the railroad standardized, but that was fairly common in the late 1800s. But we do try to match that and the size of the trains. The passenger cars are numbered according to what we found in rosters. The numbers do match the series that we follow through. So we do try to match as much as we can the historical part. The locomotives all have real numbers to match the locomotive. Sometimes we'll actually match a specific photograph of a locomotive that we found. We do change the trucks to match the Fox trucks. The Boston and Maine had about, I might get the number wrong, but it was, I think 60 to 80% of their cars at the time had Fox trucks. So we make those conversions and stuff like that. So.
And most of the rolling stock, are those Ambroids or?
No, some of those are Bachmans as well. Some of them are, there are a whole variety of things. There's some old LaBelle kits that were put together. There's some cars that are scratch built, not too many of those, but there's more planned. There's a shortage of baggage cars and milk cars. So we have milk cars and baggage cars on our work list right now to do. There are kits for those around, but to try to get some of the cars to do the cars for the AP program, I got a couple cars planned to meet some of that. So.
Hey, Rich,
Yeah.
Greg here. I found that news story fascinating. Did that reporter, did he know all that history, or did he do some quick research for that?
I talked to him about that. I was interested because he has a weekly program. I actually have a show every night. He told me that he generally researches that 5-minute piece that he does for about 3 days before the story comes out. And when he was inside, he was starting to tell me his story. And I happen to have a placard in front of Union, and he reads the placard and he goes, "My goodness, you have the story right here." So it matched. When he was in, he asked me, "How do we get our story? You know, how we develop the buildings and the track plan and all of that." And I pulled out a book that we use, McClure, Elizabeth Ann McClure did a Footsteps of Wakefield, a history book. It's this big dictionary-sized book, and it covers letters from the Civil War and the first residents of town, hotels, schools, railroads, all that big volume. And we use this book all the time. So he looked at that book and he's like, "Where can I get one of these?" And we happen to have had 2 left over in our gift shop area. He says, "I can't go home without one of these things." So he bought one of those, and then I showed him around the passenger station and stuff like that. But he does research his stories. Sometimes they're a little bit comical. We might question how much of it is real and a little bit made up, but it's interesting anyways. That little piece, even though it was only like 5 minutes long, the following weekend we had 45 visitors.
Yeah.
They all wanted to see this wonderful little layout that Fritz Witherby talked about.
That's great to have a little local interest story like that where he covers it.
Yeah. So,
They got some excellent shots of it too. I gotta give them that.
yeah. Well, they came in. They had a camera with a rolling tripod. And they came in. They had a producer and a cameraman. And Fritz kept yelling at him and talking to him, not yelling. He said, sorry. He kept telling him, "Don't get too much now. I only want a teaser. We'll come back someday." That was pretty good. They wanted to do the whole thing. They were like following the trains. And he says, no, not too much. Just a little bit. Anyways, so the train controller, one of the questions, obviously, I know we talked quite a bit with Jim. This is not for everybody, obviously, but there's some easy enough stuff you can do. We have a guy that saw what we were doing, and he bought I think the other version of it, and he did his, I think he has a 4x6 layout, and in about 2 or 3 weeks, he had all that automated. So there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of users. They have educational videos that you can watch. Just take you step by step on how to create your track plan and those kind of things. There's a guy, Rudy, is excellent. He does a whole bunch of short 10-minute clips. So you can get to lesson 18 and learn how to do this.
Actually, the software that you're using, you're really not writing software to run your trains. What
Nope.
you're doing is filling in pieces of information the program asked you for.
Exactly. It's not, people say it's being programmed, but it's really not being programmed like you just said. You're identifying your track plan, what your trains want to do. And Chris is really sharp. He pushes the software quite a bit, but it's there. He's not like reinventing the software. He just knows to put, like in a particular block, he'll know there's a grade crossing in the middle of the block. So he'll put a marker in there to know when the whistle should go off, when to slow down, things like that. So, but it's all within the software. It's just basically configuring it and tweaking it to, the logic of the trains, where they should be going and stuff like that. What's interesting, you guys saw the double-headed train, the long one that Chris put it with about 14 cars, 13, 14 cars, varies a little bit sometimes. Those two locomotives are not in a consist like we know it. Each one is calibrated on its own, and the speeds are just matched through the program. So they're not, a lot of times I use a Prodigy DCC system, an early one. And for me to consist, I have to link the two locomotives together. And from that point on, they're like one. But this here, the two locomotives are actually running independently. They're just speed matched on their own. It's kind of like a measured mile, the calibration process. We have a length of track in the workshop, in the staging area, and you start a calibration and you actually run from very, very slow speed, and then you continue running at higher speed, a little bit higher, and you go back and forth. And what you're basically doing is setting up a line, a graph of what speed it should be running at and what speed it's actually running at. And it's basically calibrating itself so that when you want the train to run 15 miles per hour, it actually is running 15 miles per hour, because it's like a little physics problem in a way. Nothing is really telling the train to stop at a particular place. It says it entered a block. You know how fast you're supposed to be going. You know how long the block is. And then with the speed and the distance with a certain amount of time, with the time elapsed and the speed you're running at, you should be at this particular point at a certain time. And then the verification is when you enter the next block. And then, you reset it for that next block. And that's how it keeps everything in time.
And so besides filling in the information it asked you, the other thing that you have to do is all of the wiring that you said that you did yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you don't have to do it all at once. You might remember that description that Chris sent you. When we first did this, we only did 2 blocks, and it ran fine with just 2 blocks. It just happened the sensors were only in those 2 blocks. So as we added more and more blocks, in fact, I've still got the last 3 that I added into the turntable that are not into the thing yet. So when we get back together, probably in the spring, depending when everyone feels comfortable with this, we'll wire those in. We'll put those in as well, so you can step your way into it. And then when we have little issues, we'll add more blocks or things like that. So there's expansion capabilities. You just make it more and more sophisticated. Yep. So
what impresses, if I may, just for a sec, sorry for cutting you off, Jim. What impresses me is I get a good image of, you've got the B&M flavor down. Like, seriously, I get that impression of the early B&M just by looking at the layout.
Yep.
And where that's your mission, you've succeeded. You absolutely have, and that's great. One of the things that I want to ask you is, what do you think the toughest thing about modeling that era is? Because I think you and I both know that models from the early B&M are not easy to find. The locomotives are hard to find. Sure, you can find a B-15, but it's probably one of the later ones with superheat. You know what I mean? So what do you think the hardest part of modeling that is?
Usually it's one of the challenges that we see on this layout, and I always tell that to the guys that are working different things on it, is we're trying to capture that history. So you don't want to reinvent the history. There's a tendency on model railroaders that a lot of us tend to freelance. So in this case here, you don't want to freelance. So we try to, the hardest part is finding accurate information to try to accurately depict that. And one of the interesting things we get, even though it's 1909, we get a lot of information from visitors that have lived here their whole life. You know, it's the Elizabeth Ann McCurdy, she's passed away now. She was 94 when she first visited our layout, and we didn't have anywhere as close to what we have now. She looked at my little Matthews station, and I only had 3 photographs of that station. I didn't have any drawings, and I researched what railroads did in the late 1800s when they built stations, and they're excellent documents that way. Written documents are sometimes better than pictures, which is if you read it. So I made that station the best I could. And then she came in with her, and sharp as a whip, she looked at my model, and she looked at me, and she looked at the model again, and looked, and she says, "You're bringing history back to life." And that was, such a comment. When we build a model of something, whether we're building models of 1950s or 70s, or the guys that do Civil War in the late 1800s, 1860s or so, in a way, our hobby, we do try to bring some of that history back to life. And that comment she gave me was like right on the mark. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, man, for someone that had actually seen the real building when she was a kid, she remembered it. And she says, you're bringing the history back to life. So finding accurate information is one of it. And then trying to be disciplined to keep the details. We all have a tendency where we want to take a shortcut and slap something down or make something quick. And in a museum, we've kind of raised the bar, so it's a little bit of a challenge. So we made another layout in the corner. I didn't show you that at all today. We have a late 50s, early 60s Lionel layout. It's 6 by around 10 feet. And on that layout, anything goes. We try to, people can do the scenery the way they want. If things are a little out of size, it's okay. That's the fun. We want to have that as a fun part of it. So we may have another layout we'll do just for fun as well. Maybe a modular layout or something like that, where we, anything kind of goes. Because what this is really kind of a historical. We want to try to preserve that history as best we can. So I hope it's a long answer, but.
Well, you answered the question. I can't complain. And I mean, you guys probably aren't the only people who have that problem when you're modeling a museum layout. I mean, think about it. If you're modeling that set period, especially on a set time period, not just a year or a range of years, but like 1 week, that is going to be difficult because it's unless you have somebody that just decided a century ago, I'm going to take all these pictures this week and I'm going to save them for these guys that a century down the road are going to build a model railroad. There's going to be a lot of guesswork.
Yeah, well, there is, and surprisingly, I'm always amazed at how much information when you look for it actually shows up. Somebody 2 weeks ago came in and they said their wife had this item that they wanted to donate to the museum. And I'm like, okay, sometimes we get stuff and you kind of, I don't know what this is, but she said she has a book that belonged to one of these stations and she wants to, they live in Maryland, and she said she'd like to give it to the museum. So I said, okay, I gave him my contact information. He came back about a half hour later. He says, I actually have the book in the car. She told me to give it to you. So what this book is, I had never seen one before. It's a handwritten in pencil registered journal of all the cars that were coming in and out of a particular station, somewheres in the Wakefield area. It shows where the car came from, how long the car was, what the road name was, what the number, how much it weighed. where its destination was, what cargo was in it. And that's like absolutely amazing that I found like a B&O car of a particular number, a certain weight and the type of car and everything. And it's in this logbook. So you find your information in a lot of different places. That just confirms. I'm trying to look at the book now and figure out what station this journal came from, because I know it's got stuff just south of us and stuff just north of us. And so far, I haven't found any cars that are in any of the stations in the middle. So I know it's one of the stations. I just don't know which one. Probably Sanbornville, but I'm not sure of that. So.
Question: you do 1909, right?
Yep.
Okay. I've got a book here. Got it off of Google. Railroad Structures and Estimates, 1909.
Okay.
And I got another one, which I found because of interesting history, called Buildings and Structures of American Railroads, 1893.
We have that book.
Okay. Interesting. In that picture is a Lehigh Valley station in that book,
yep, which
was the inspiration for the Disney motion picture, the station what's his name? And Polk has done a model of it.
Okay.
And it all started because of that book.
Yep.
Oh, it was in Model Railroader too.
Okay.
It's a little flag stop.
Yeah.
And no one knows exactly where it was. It's just, there's the picture.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the kind of material you need, though, to build a station like you're talking about when you don't have anything else.
Yeah, you've got, sometimes you've got a blurry picture of a different year. But, when you look, if you're a detective of sort and you look for details, the Union Station is an interesting one. We had two photographs, okay, a little story. We had two photographs and they were 7 years apart. And when I were detailing the station, I was going to figure out what to put on the platform. I noticed on both photos, even though they were 7 years apart, that there was a board against the building in two different places. And I'm like, that is strange. If I only saw one photo and I saw this board, I figured it was a piece of scrap lumber. Okay. But the same exact board was in this two different spots on the station 7 years apart. And then all of a sudden I started thinking, and I'm like, I know what this is. When you have an express car come in and you want to roll a barrel off of it, they would put that board up against the car and they'd roll the barrel off onto the platform or roll it up the platform, instead of using a hoist, or there was no elevated platform at that particular location. So I'm sure they were using this board against the door floor to roll a barrel up and down or slide a box up and down. That's what the board was for. So just by looking at two photographs, we have a whole little story about one little piece of wood laying against the station.
Well, rolling barrels is an art. Make them go in where you want them.
Oh yeah, well,
they're
it's
not
probably easier with one board. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a little. Sometimes in the history books, you start noticing what they were shipping, like the finished lumber in East Wakefield. That generated me to scratch bill 3 wagons, one with a full load of lumber, one empty, and one being unloaded into a car, because I figured if they were doing that many box cars, that they were basically loading about 15 to 20 wagons a day into these cars, which is pretty amazing. So that you're bound to see a bunch of wagons coming in and out. So
you talking completed wagons?
Yeah. Well, I made them out of brass because they're just like to haul finished cut lumber.
Oh, okay.
But little wagons, HO scale. But there's a lot of different little things on the layout that you'll find, that we have these little stories. I read an interesting book. You don't have to just get it from railroads either. I read a book. It said, I think it was called 300 Years of Farming in New England. And I didn't read the whole book, but I read from like 1840 to like 1920. And that period, you learned a lot about how the railroad interacted with the farmers and what kind of livestock they raised. Like sheep was very, very common in 1909. So that's why we have 2 flocks of sheep on the layout. The livestock, for the most part, was for themselves. They weren't shipping the livestock out to meat packers. At that time, the railroads were bringing in, the Chicago, the big meat plants. Most of that was, meat wasn't coming in from here going out. A lot of it was coming in, but the local farmers would do it themselves. But you learn a lot of different things by looking at different books like that. And as a model railroader, you usually don't do that. That's what happens when you get involved with a project like this. First thing you know, you're starting to figure out what color was the clothes the people wore in 1909. So you paint the figures with the more accurate clothes and what the fashions look like and things like that.
There's a book, I don't remember the name of it, but it's nothing but potatoes. It's the whole history of the potato and how it did or didn't change history and how it was grown and how it was shipped. Nothing but potatoes.
Yep. Maine,
of course, plays a large part of that.
Anybody modeling Bangor and a Rooster needs to know that.
Yeah. I do 1923. What steam appliances were actually invented and used by 1923? That's a whole nother.
Well, we have one of those heater cars on our layout so that the potatoes wouldn't freeze.
Yeah.
Rich, I can't thank you enough for doing this tonight. You and Jack both. This has really been fantastic. And I'll say it again. I think your museum is as close to a living history of 1909 for the B&M Railroad and the community that it served in New Hampshire as anything that I could imagine. And I've seen some other clubs, and I know some other people that have in the process of building model railroads for their museums. But in my opinion, this is as close to the Pennon Museum in Great Britain as the U.S. has, at least as I've been able to find. And I really do appreciate you and Jack both leading me through it and showing it to me and being here tonight to try to convey this to everybody. I'm amazed at what you all are doing, and I hope that in some way this is going to help and benefit the museum and your club.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure it will, because people will look at the things you've been posting on YouTube. So people that can't visit this year, especially, that'll help them as well. So, and they'll plan to visit next year or something.
For everybody's information, I've got an article coming out in S-Scale Resource the end of this month, and Rich and his club and the museum are featured in that article. And next month in October, toward the end of October, I've got an article coming out that will include Rich and his club and his railroad, and it'll be an O-Scale Resource magazine. I'm convinced, best I can find out at least, and I'm not an expert by any means, but this software that Darren talked about when he was here, Darren Johns, and what the club is using, this I forget how you pronounce it. Yeah, that software, I'm convinced, is state of the art, and it really doesn't require anybody to be a computer specialist or really even know how to program computers. As long as you can figure out the simple diagram, the wiring diagram that Rich showed, and as long as you can answer questions the computer asks you about your model railroad and how you want it to operate, that's all that's involved. And you may have to press more than one button, but it seems to me that it becomes awful easy without having to find a crew to run your model railroad, to be able to go into your area, go into your model railroad area and press the button or whatever number of buttons you have to press and sit back and enjoy an operating session. And you can participate by running a locomotive yourself while the computer runs everything else. You don't have to give up operating yourself, but this would just allow you to operate on a whole different level, it seems to me. So I hope you've enjoyed tonight. You're going to hear more about this operation and other ways to operate your model railroad, because Clint Oliver is scheduled to be here and talk about his model railroad in a few weeks. And I think you're going to be absolutely amazed to hear him and what he's been able to accomplish with one of the outstanding model railroads, I think, that exist in this country. I'd love to find other clubs and other museums. Like I say, if it hadn't have been for Jack, who I can't pronounce his last name correctly, if it hadn't have been for him, I wouldn't have found this museum. So if any of you know of another museum you think that would be of interest to us and interest to you to talk about and to have them come on one of the shows, I wish you'd let me know, because I think that this way of showing and maintaining the history of our country through model railroading is something that if we can promote it and encourage it, I think it'll be well worth all of our time. So with that said, now next week, we have a totally different person, a totally different subject. Charlie Rouse is a very talented modeler. Again, Jack, no last name, recommended him to me. And I found him, and he's an exceptional modeler. He's a 0-3 modeler. And I think you're really going to enjoy what he has to say and how he's going to present his philosophy about modeling and model building, and give you some tips and techniques. So I hope you'll return. I hope you've enjoyed tonight, and I hope you found out something that may help you in your modeling. So everybody, thanks for coming. And Rich, Jack, thank you so very much. And Jack, I'll work on your last name. I really will.